Everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a interesting, big 10-game slate for you for baseball. Should be a pretty difficult slate. This one, there's a lot of decent pitchers, but nobody that really jumps off the page is great. And then we have in tough matchups as well. And then we have some good bats that are pretty good in the value department for the most part. And we have a lot of good opportunity here for home runs and things. So it's going to be a wacky slate because we do have a game in Cincinnati, which is definitely going to be helpful as well. So anyhow, let's go ahead and get into the slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It helps the channel out. I really do appreciate it a ton. I do want to say thank you guys to all you who watch videos and stuff like that. Hopefully everybody did well yesterday. We did phenomenal. Hopefully we can continue that trend today. So let's go ahead and get into the slate. So we have some GPP plays uh, for this slate. We don't have anybody at the pitching positions that really jump off the page as a top tier option. But Crochet is probably my favorite play right now for the White Sox, ironically. He's been absolutely phenomenal with 6 straight games over 20 fantasy points, and he's been pretty good for most of the season with the exception of a couple games in the middle. He's got a decent matchup today. I do like some of the bats for Boston, but I do think that he has some potential to have a really solid game. And he's got the best K rate on the slate, so that gives him a lot of upside. Yamamoto is in play for the Dodgers, so he's got a very tough match against the Yankees. Soto may not end up playing, so that would definitely give him a little bit of a boost, but Judge is still in there, and he could still hit a home run. However, he does have a good strikeout potential, so he's definitely a decent option, but he's not a great one as the matchup is very difficult. Bassett has a pretty interesting matchup here against Oakland. Now, I do think he'll get in the 15 to 25 fantasy point range, which is pretty good for his price point here. However, I do think he could give up a couple of home runs to Oakland, as a couple guys do have some nice upside from a home run perspective. So he is a GPP play, but he's definitely an interesting one. Framber Valdez looks really good today for Houston, though he's been very inconsistent so far this season. He does have good upside in this matchup, and his strikeout rate should be okay here, even though it's been very inconsistent so far this season. Hopefully, he can limit the earned runs and give you a decent fantasy potential game, but he's definitely a little bit risky on this one. Looking at King for San Diego, he's got a good match against Arizona. He's actually been pretty solid for at least some of the last few games. He's been a little bit inconsistent this season, but he is decent in this K rate today. He's one of the better K rate options on this entire slate, and K rate is very important for fantasy. He definitely has some potential today, and I don't really love Arizona a lot today, so he's probably one of my better options, I think, on the slate in general, and he's priced pretty fairly. A couple other guys we could look at. Lorenzen for Texas has a good matchup against San Francisco. San Francisco's been up and down, but he's got some good upside in this matchup. The only problem here really is the K rate is a little bit limited, but it's a good enough that he's definitely worth a look as he's pitched fairly well so far this season. And Lance Lynn is kind of a GPP play here as well against Colorado. Colorado has been absolutely abysmal, and they look terrible for this matchup as well. Now, Lynn doesn't have the highest of ceilings, but he is cheap enough that he's definitely a GPP play on the slate, but he definitely carries some risk as that K rate is the lowest among my GPP plays on this one. We do have some extreme GPP plays, actually just one of them. That's Mr. Weathers for Miami against Cleveland. Now, Cleveland's not a team that's probably going to score a ton of fantasy points today, but I think Weathers is a guy that has some upside as he's been pretty solid in at least some games this season, and this matchup is not too terrible. However, his K rate will not be as big in this game as it has been in some of the others, as Cleveland does not strike out much. So to keep that in mind, but he is a extreme GPP play. I actually have 4 Hail Mary options today. Criswell for Boston against the White Sox. The White Sox have been terrible. They do have a couple bats that look decent, but he's high risk, high reward as he's a boom or bust play. Allen for Cleveland against Miami is in a very similar situation. He's been giving up a lot of earned runs in some games. He seems like a very extreme boomer bust where he's either going to score, 15 or more fantasy points or under negative fantasy points. And that's kind of what he's been doing the last 5 or 6 games. This matchup is in his favor, though. But he did absolutely abysmal against Detroit and Colorado lately, while having good games against the Angels, Minnesota, and Chicago White Sox before. So very interesting potential there, but he's high risk, high reward, obviously. Looking at Hogan Harris for Oakland, he's got a tougher match against Toronto, but he has flashed some good games so far with some decent strikeout potential. He definitely carries some risk today, but Toronto has not been as good as we'd hoped this season. and so he definitely carries low potential. Now, Potet for the Yankees, he's got extremely difficult matchup here. It's the Dodgers. However, he's only pitched 2 games, and both those games he's done okay, including having a okay strikeout rate so far. This matchup, though, is a nightmare, obviously, so he is an extreme Hail Mary play, just an extreme beer or bust. But he has managed to get wins in both his games, and he's had enough strikeouts to give him some potential. However, he has given up 2 home runs already in those 2 starts, so let's keep that in mind here. So let's go ahead and get into our batters. So we'll start at catcher, and Yunier Diaz for Houston is one of my favorite plays on the slate. He's got good metrics. He's been hitting the ball very well. He's had 3 straight games with home runs. Now he is switching back away from St. Louis, so hopefully he can continue this stretch. But he's been hitting the ball very well, and he does draw a lot of upside here. I also like Fry for Cleveland, and he would be very close to being a core play. His price is super high though, but he's hit the ball very well this season, and he's got a lot of upside in this matchup here. I also like Cal Raleigh for Seattle, as he does draw good matchup metrics here. This is a matchup against a pitcher who's only pitched a couple times, but he's been solid so far this season with the home run upside, so he's definitely worth a look. Looking at first base, we do like quite a few guys at this position, honestly, but Ohtani and Freddie Freeman are the most expensive options, and they definitely look really solid today. But Patrick Wisdom is nice and cheap today for the Cubs. The Cubs have a lot of upside today, and he's definitely one of the reasons why. He hasn't started a lot of the games lately, but if he does start, then he'll be somebody to consider on this slate, as he has very fantastic metrics. But Goldschmidt also jumps off the page, is really good today, as he's been pretty good so far this season, and he has some nice upside here at $3,900. He has really improved the last couple weeks, and so hopefully he can continue that trend. Some other options today: Pascal Quintino for Kansas City. His metrics are off the charts. Reyes is a good hitter. He's not going to hit a home run, but he definitely has a lot of opportunity for a solid game here. Vlad Jr. is also in play for Toronto as well. And Spencer Steer. His metrics are literally off the charts today, but he's going to be hard to roster at his price point at this position, especially with so much value available at the position in general. Looking at second baseman, Jose Altuve looks really solid for Houston, but he's not a must play. Again, another position where we have a lot of good value, and so you don't really have to pay up here. Horner for the Cubs looks great, and a very positive match here against Cincinnati, especially at Cincinnati. So the Cubs look really good today. Simeon is a good expensive option as a contrarian off of Altuve for Texas, as he has a solid matchup here. And then Cronenworth, he looks really good for San Diego today. Now, I do think San Diego is a little bit risky, but he definitely looks solid today, and he's one of my favorite plays from the team. Jimenez for Cleveland, Dylan Moore for Seattle also both look really good at this position. And then Davis Schneider and Luis Rengifo are kind of contrarian options there. Looking at third base, we're going to be Cubs heavy right here with Chris Morel for Chicago Cubs. He looks absolutely fantastic today, but he has not hit the ball well this season. However, the last few games he's played, he's been really solid. So I look for him to continue this trend, and he's priced nice and fair as well. If Patrick Wisdom also plays, though, he can also fit in here at $3,800. He also could play at first base. Bregman doesn't have the best matchup metrics here, but he is interesting today if he ends up drawing the start. He didn't play the last game, but I look for him to hopefully bounce back here. But he's been somewhat inconsistent lately, so he's going to have to be a little bit contrarian. And Vlad Jr. can actually play here at third base as well today, which gives him a lot of added element here. I didn't mean to put him in there. Sorry about that, guys. Looking at shortstop, Mookie Betts, Bobby Witt Jr., both super expensive, both have a ton of upside here. I also like Corey Seager for Texas if he was to play today, though he is day-to-day, so he is a little bit risky. But the guy that really jumps off the page here, he's nice and cheap, and he is starting to hit the ball a little bit better, is Dansby Swanson for the Cubs. Now, he has been inconsistent this season, but he's had some good games recently, and the matchup metrics here are fantastic. He's also averaging 6 fantasy points a game against the Cincinnati Reds so far this season. He doesn't need a ton, because we just want to pay down for him a little bit so that we can pay up at other positions. Bichette is also in play today for Toronto, despite not really doing a ton so far this season, and then J.P. Crawford. Let's see, Crawford for Seattle is very interesting, and he's nice in prices. Good contrarian play off of Swanson. And then also Tim Anderson for the Miami. He's kind of a one-off cheap option, Hail Mary play, so he's definitely worth a look, though, as the metrics are really good in his favor. Looking at outfielders, this is where it gets a little nutty, but we have Otani obviously available here. Suzuki for the Cubs looks really good today. He looked better yesterday, but he still looks good today. Obviously, yesterday he hit a home run, so he was a really good spot. But he still looks really good today, so he's definitely in play. Alvarez, let's see, I can't type. Jordan Alvarez for Houston looks solid. He's still priced pretty fair. He's been really good recently, so he definitely has a lot of upside here, and his price is still cheap enough that he's definitely worth a look. I also like Aaron Judge, though he's very expensive today. Tatis Jr. also looks good. Tyler O'Neill for Boston has been inconsistent lately, but he definitely has some good metrics today. He's probably one of the few guys on that team that I like a lot. Bellinger also looks fantastic for the Cubs. I mean, the Cubs have a very fantastic situation. I meant to put Alvarez here at as a core here, but even though he's fairly expensive today, he's one of my favorite hitters on the slate. Then we will look at Ian Happ for the Cubs. Now, usually I don't use him very often, but when his metrics jump off the page, then I try to utilize him, and they definitely look good today. I also like Corbin Carroll for Arizona, even though he's been struggling and consistent so far this season. He definitely draws good matchup metrics. Dylan Carlson for St. Louis is very interesting because he's dirt cheap. If he was to draw the start, he has not done anything worthwhile so far this season. But if he draws the start, he's $2,000, and he doesn't need a lot of fantasy points to pay off here. Obviously, he's high risk, high reward, but he's definitely interesting here. Conforto at $4,400 is a good option for San Francisco. Probably my favorite play from that team. Friedel does jump off the page with some good metrics today, but he's definitely risky. So does Rob Ref Snyder. He's a little bit inconsistent, and I don't love the matchup, but I do think he's an interesting option today. Tyler Freeman for Cleveland does look interesting as well, and so does Verdugo for the Yankees against Yamamoto. He's probably the favorite guy outside of Judge from that team. Let's go ahead and look at our stacks here. So our stacks today are fairly interesting. We have some good stacks at the top with Houston and Cincinnati. Now both these teams have some very good bats in them, and both of them are actually fairly good from a fantasy perspective today. So I do think that this is an interesting play. With Houston, it's not as expensive as it could be with Alvarez, Myers, Altuve, and then whoever starts at catcher, and then Pena or Bregman. So I think that's a really good stack for Cincinnati. Fairchild, Stevenson, Steer, India, and then either Friedel or Dunn. Now, this stack is somewhat interesting because Dunn, he'd be kind of a Hail Mary play, but it's a very good stack today, and I think it's got a lot of upside. For the Cubs, Burrell, Suzuki, Hoarder, Hop, and Swanson, I love the stack. I'm going to definitely utilize that one quite a bit. For St. Louis, we actually have a pretty cheap stack today with Herrera, Gorman, Burleson, Goldie, and Carlson. For the Dodgers, this is an expensive stack with Otani and whoever starts at catcher, Hernandez, and then Freeman, Betts, or Hayward, though I don't like this stack very much. It's so expensive and going to be hard to roster as a result. For Kansas City, Witt, Pasquanto, Perez, Velasquez, and then Garcia, Melendez, or Fraser. This is also expensive stack. Not super ideal. The Yankees stack is also going to be somewhat hard today, but it's not super bad. And Judge, Verdugo, Stanton, LeMayo, and Wells. San Francisco and Cleveland, I don't love these stacks, but they do look decent today. San Francisco is cheap, though, with Chapman, Conforto, Ramos, Bailey, and Soler. And then for Cleveland, Quan, Naylor, Fry, Jimenez, and Ramirez. That's a very expensive stack for Cleveland, but it is doable. The bottom stacks here, obviously the pitchers I like the best are going to be against these teams. These are stacks that we don't necessarily want to stack the top 5 guys, maybe 2 or 3. And a lot of these, like with Toronto, Jansen, Vlad Jr., and Snyder, all jump off the page a lot. Whereas Turner and Springer are kind of secondary. For Texas, Seager, Garcia, Semien, Tavares, and Lowe or Smith. A very expensive stack and be hard to roster today. This Miami stack is actually weird because the top 3 look really solid with Myers, De La Cruz, and Chisholm. but I do think Lopez and Bell have some upside as well. San Diego, Tatis, Profar, Arias, and then Cronenworth, Merrill, or Kim. I definitely like Cronenworth and Merrill a lot. For the Cubs, or sorry, for the White Sox, this is a horrible stack. Really, if you want to stack the White Sox, I would just stack with the top 2 or 3 with Jokes, Robert, Sheets, and Vaughn DeJong. And then for Boston, Duran, Ref Slider, Devers, O'Neill, Cooper, or Westbrook. Not a great stack either. Seattle, kind of risky stack, but they have some upside with France, Raleigh, Rodriguez, Moore, and Bliss. And for the Angels, Ward, Hope, Adele, Nito, and Pilar. And then for Arizona, Marte, Peterson, Walker, Carroll, and Gurriel Jr. I do think that these bottom few stacks are pretty rough. Oakland stack has some home run or bust options, so maybe using 1 or 2 of these guys as one-offs is kind of the way to go here. Rooker, Langerle, Sherman, Belede, and Angira or Toro. And then for Colorado, McMahon is really the only guy that's a viable option here. But if you want to stack that team up, McMahon, Blackman, Diaz, Doyle, and Toglia are the best options. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave